Hello all, I am Abdul-Lateef Ismail, a master's student at Nelson Mandela University, and will be presenting today my MSc topic entitled Thicket for the Forest. Should Mesic Thicket be reclassified under the forest biome? For clarity, I will first briefly explain what this topic is all about, which is exploring the boundary between Mesic Thicket and forest. Also, the study will assess the placement of Mesic thicket and how this thicket type compares to other thicket types like valley and arid thicket. The research question thus generated is, would Mesic thicket be more appropriately classified under forest? This talk will cover the rationale behind this question and briefly detail how it can be explored, as well as the drivers and potential outcomes. I will start with some background information and present the conclusions and descriptions of some of the pertinent pieces of literature. I will briefly go over the history of thicket classification and its current standing. I will then speak about Mesic thicket itself. I will also then explore the terms forest and thicket and attempt to place these terms on a global perspective. So, the Albany subtropical thicket of the Eastern Cape has had a turbulent history of classification. For example, thicket has previously been placed in savanna, as fynbos adjacent, in the Karoo, and in association with the Indian Ocean subtropical belt. It was only formally recognized as a biome in 1996 by Lowe and Rebello. Aycock's 1953 seminal work on the veld types of South Africa can be considered as one of the most important early descriptions of the Eastern Cape's thicket vegetation. Thicket here is described as valley bushveld under the Karoo and Karoid broad category, along with the thickets of similar physiognomic stature in KZN and the Lowveld. Valley bushveld is described as deriving from Karoid origins, but in some cases the subtropical affinity of the southern varieties is mentioned. Addo bush, for example, is thought to be derived from the coastal forest of Alexandria. Aycock here speaks about the dense, spinescent nature of thicket, but also the stature it can reach in some areas. Everard in 1987 advanced the notions of Caffrarian and Caffrarian succulent thicket of Cowling 1984 and further divided these two thicket types into xeric and mesic forms. Some differences between the Caffrarian succulent and Caffrarian thicket included greater dominance of succulence, spinescence, and decreased height in the succulent forms. So here is the ordination space on which Everard placed these thicket types, with the xeric succulent thicket occupying the driest part of the rainfall gradient and mesic Caffrarian thicket occupying the wettest part. Flock et al. In 2003 represents one of the most recent and most detailed attempts at classifying thicket. This manuscript stratifies thicket vegetation across numerous hierarchies, the first of these being whether the vegetation occurs on the dunes or inland, based on previously established floristic differences. Dune thickets were subsequently divided into geographical regions, while inland thicket was separated into three types based on structure and rainfall, and these are arid, valley, and thicket. These mainland thicket types were further subdivided by drainage basins, creating 112 unique thicket vegetation types. Here is a map showing the delineations of the valley arid mesic thicket hierarchy. Note here that thicket denotes mesic thicket. So what is mesic thicket and how does it differ from valley and arid thicket? Mesic thicket is mostly situated in the Sundays and Buffalo River valleys, as well as in the Albany region and just south of the Great Escarpment. Pictured here is a typical mesic thicket landscape with emergent euphorbias prominent. Mesic thicket occurs in areas with higher rainfall and is further distinguished from valley and arid thicket based on a taller structure, diminished dominance of succulents, and a greater diversity of woody species. So here are some excerpts from the veg type descriptions of Albany and Sunday's mesic thicket. The key aspects here to note are the height, which ranges from 3 to 5 meters. Although this general range is also given for valley thicket, the height of the mesic thicket types seems to be consistently taller. The decreased dominance of succulents and decreased incidence of spinescence are also highlighted in these descriptions. And what species commonly occur in Mesic Thicket? These dominant species lists, extracted from the veg map descriptions, gives a good overview of the floristics of Mesic Thicket. Although the diminished succulent presence is something often touted about Mesic Thicket, there are still numerous succulent species common in Mesic Thicket. These include a suite of shade-loving crassulas such as Crassula ubicularis, larger succulents like aloes and dracaena, and of course the iconic tree euphorbias. Many of the woody trees in Mesic Thicket are also shared with the forest biome. So these are trees such as Epidaites and Vepris. And here's just a comparison with Sunday's Valley Thicket. So succulence is a more important component of Valley Thicket. Not only is the richness of succulent species greater, but succulents and CAM photosynthesis can become especially dominant in Valley Thicket, with species like Speckboom and Crassula ovata. The dominant species in Sunday's Valley Thicket is shown here. These images here show Sunday's Valley Thicket at Addo to the left and Sunday's Mesic Thicket at the Sierberg to the right. Although one image of each thicket type might not be ideal to represent the vegetation, these images may allude to the differences between Mesic and Valley Thicket and give a rough generalization of the vegetation. One aspect clearly visible is height. The pole pictured here is approximately 3 meters tall and was placed in a representative portion within the respective habitats. Another aspect to note is the density of Valley Thicket, which is almost impenetrable. I will now move on to the global perceptions on the terms forest and thicket. So thicket is a rather ambiguous term. Thicket is globally used to refer to a specific physiognomic expression of vegetation, a successional stage in forest development, and also as a distinct biome. For example, the image viewed here is of a successional stage in southern coastal forest, also termed as thicket. Charles Dominique et al. In 2015, for example, described the thickets of Hluhluwe Park as a vegetation unit distinct from forest and savanna. Although these thickets contain many of the genera in Albany thicket, such as Grua and Euclea, Hluhluwe thickets contain little succulents and overall are less tangled than the thicket of the Eastern Cape. Elsewhere, the vine thickets of northern Australia refer to a more open vegetation with a canopy of between 5 to 9 meters and a very strong tropical forest association. The semi-deciduous thickets of Madagascar in many ways show remarkable similarity to Albany subtropical thicket, with a high proportion and diversity of succulents, a high incidence of succulents, and a bimodal semi-arid rainfall regime. Some of the shared succulent genera include aloe, euphorbia, pachypodium, and members of the Didieraceae. The term forest is incredibly diverse in its definition and usage, owing to its reference in many fields including ecology, forestry, and conservation. The UN, or more specifically the Kyoto Protocol, defines forest as an area of more than 1 hectare with a tree cover of 10 to 30% and a height of between 2 and 5 meters, and this can vary wildly between different countries. Furber and Langendoen's 2016 descriptions of world vegetation types report forest and woodland types as characterized by broadly mesomorphic, typically with at least 10% cover. Tree growth forms generally have a single main stem and more or less definite crowns, and may be as low as 2 meters. Similarly, in South Africa, forests are also classified by structure as high, tall, short, or low forests, with short and low forests collectively termed as scrub forests. This table, derived from White 1983, gives a structural criteria. Notice how low forests can be as short as 2 meters. The act of distinguishing forest and thicket is something that has been previously attempted in the literature. Midgley et al. 1997, for example, placed Albany thicket in the forest biome on the basis that it shares important ecological similarities, as in both biomes are not fire-driven, the nutrient cycling processes are similar, and there is a high incidence of bird-dispersed fruit in both biomes. Flockadal in 2003 distinguishes thicket from forest in that the most important disturbance is from mega herbivores rather than tree falls, that most woody recruitment is from resprouting, and that the dominant woody species are shade intolerant. Gowling in 2005 also notes that the scarcity of seedling recruitment in thicket distances it from forest, although seedling recruitment is stated to be more important in the more mesic forms of thicket. Linda's 2014 manuscript on the regionalization of African vegetation places thicket into an arid subregion linked to the succulent vegetation of East Africa, with South African forests placed under the Afromontane classification. Messina in 2021 also notes that at large scales, thickets acquire the functional properties of forest. So this brings me to the research question. Is Mesic thicket more appropriately classified under forest? This question arises from perceived floristic, structural and ecological similarities between Mesic thicket and forest, as well as the parallel perceived differences from other thicket types. This question is driven or incentivized by a number of factors. Arguably, the most important driver is one of vegetation science. This is the act of classifying vegetation in a way that makes the most ecological and management sense. This notion spurs the collection of data to assess the current classification of thicket. There is also a factor of added protection. Forests are the most protected biome in South Africa, and adding more land classified under forest would theoretically generate more overall protection for the indigenous vegetation of the country. This, however, can be considered more of a potential outcome rather than a driver of research. Another important factor is the highlighting of the succulent thicket types. The dominance of succulents and cam in valley and arid thicket types makes the ecology of this vegetation fairly unique, and this can potentially be highlighted if the succulent thicket types are regarded as a vegetation unit distinct from Mesic thicket. So, how should this research question be approached? For one, it would be useful to refer to the National Vegetation Map Handbook. This extract details the principles assessed when distinguishing vegetation types. Aspects such as shared ecological drivers, structure, and floristics are all evaluated. A table extracted from the same vegetation handbook describes the type of information needed to elicit certain changes. For changes in veg type boundary delineation only, sufficient motivation and GIS data is needed. For more detailed changes, such as changes in description or the creation of new veg types, publications are needed. Floristics play a key role in vegetation type description and distinction, and this would be one of the primary aspects to tackle regarding the research question. Preliminary questions regarding floristics could be: how many woody species are shared between Mesic thicket and forest? How many of the characteristic succulents of valley thicket persist into Mesic thicket? And how will the full thicket to forest spectrum arrange in an ordination space? And comparisons of structure, particularly between Mesic thicket and forest, will be important not only to aid in comparing the expression of the vegetation type, but also the ecology. So aspects like regeneration dynamics and succession can be perceived from structural data. So from this, I plan to address the research question in three ways. The first of which is a broad level floristic overview of all thicket types and forest. For this, there has been motivation to develop a novel, rapid, point-based sampling method using photography and potentially citizen science. This is presumed to collect enough floristic detail to generate an overview of the floristic differences across the thicket spectrum. More information on this will be given in a later talk. A structural comparison of Mesic thicket and forest is also planned. This would comprise of nested circular plots in forest, where aspects measured include vegetation height, stem diameters, number of stems, and understory components. The Sierberg area is targeted as an ideal site for the study as it possesses both southern Muspelt Forest and Albany Mesic Thicket or Sunday's Mesic Thicket in close proximity. Such a comparison will allow a zoomed-in comparison of Mesic Thicket and Forest, reaching beyond just floristics. So here is a map of the Eastern Cape with the blue polygons showing areas currently mapped as Mesic Thicket. Here I've pointed out areas where sampling is thought to be ideal. Circled in green is the Sundays area, which is suitable as it possesses Mesic, Valley and Arid Thicket in close proximity, as well as forests. Circled in red is the Albany region around Grahamstown, which does not possess much valley thicket, but does contain large expanses of southern coastal forest, notably in the Alexandria area. The area circled in brown is the Buffels River area, possessing Buffels Mesic Thicket, and this is also the area where Everard mapped Mesic Caffrarian Thicket. The third leg of the planned research methods is the analysis of already collected plot data. In conclusion, I will address the key takeaway points of this talk. The first one being that Thicket has had a turbulent history of classification and has undergone large-scale revision in the 21st century. Another point is the varied global use of the terms forest and thicket, and, with more direct regard to the topic at hand, the blurry line between forest and Mesic Thicket, where there is assumed to be considerable floristic, ecological and structural overlap. Thank you for listening and for being given the opportunity to present.